Hello, everyone. I'm here with Mustafa Suleyman, and you're young, but when you were even younger, you became deeply intertwined with the start of AI's modern era. You're one of the three co-founders of DeepMind, acquired by Google in 2014. In 2022, co-founded Inflection AI, which recently, in March of 2024, hit a unique deal with Microsoft where they are able to use Inflection's models, and they hired most of the startup staff, including you, and you're now appointed CEO of Microsoft AI. You know this, but this is for my audience. I'm telling you your life story.
It sounds so much more dramatic than it feels.
I was going to say, well, my question with that is, was any variation of this path clear to you 15 years ago?
Interesting. Yes, many variations were possible. I definitely think I set an intention very early on in 2009 to be deeply involved in technology. I kind of saw the rise of Facebook in sort of 2007, 2008, 2009, and I could see that it was just mind-blowing how quickly it was growing and just really changing the way people communicate and how people connect and stay in touch, and the subtlety of sort of how the platform shaped what we shared, not just how we shared it, but the type of content was changing. And it was a bit of an aha moment for me, that I really kind of realized I want to be part of this massive change. This at the time just felt like digitization. But then quite quickly I realized that the kind of ultimate version of that is teaching machines to learn, and hopefully solve important challenges in the world, make the world a better place. That was my kind of, I was pretty young. I was 24.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah. So your current standing at Microsoft, when the average consumer thinks of Microsoft, they probably think of the multi-billion-dollar investment that was made into OpenAI back in 2023, which was a continuation of the partnership that started in 2019. And with recent provisions, the partnership is set to run through 2030 in its current form. So for the average consumer, can you clarify how they should view the relationship between Microsoft and your chat experience Copilot, alongside OpenAI and their chat experience, ChatGPT? To like, what degree are they intertwined, and to what degree are they competitors?
Yeah, great question. I mean, Microsoft is 50 years old, so it has gone through all the major technology transitions of our lifetimes, from the invention of the GUI, the graphical user interface, to the operating system, to, going from mainframes to laptops and then back into the cloud. It's basically been there for all of it. And, at its heart, Microsoft's an enterprise company, even though we have a pretty large consumer business, hundreds of millions of users every day of Windows and Word and Excel and so on. But the part that didn't quite get as much attention was the consumer AI side. And that's basically what I came in to run. We have a whole ton of different AI models under the hood at the company, but the biggest one and the most widely used by a long, long way is OpenAI's models. And I think it was kind of a genius insight by Satya at the time in 2019 when they made the investment. They put $1 billion in to a non-profit structure before it had delivered any LLM models or GPTs or meaningful results. And I think in part that was a bit of a response to DeepMind doing so well. In 2016, 17, 18, we had a string of breakthroughs in the game of Go, and then in protein folding and various other publications and pieces of work. And I think there was a general sort of anxiety that this AI wave was starting to crest, and they needed, to back a major horse. And I think that takes a lot of courage, because typically, a company would think, oh, well, we'll back our own team internally. And they recognized that, there was a risk of suffering the innovator's dilemma if they didn't spread bet and both back core Microsoft research, but also this amazing partnership.
And as mentioned, you've had your hands throughout your career in a variety of the most impactful AI research labs and companies. And talking about OpenAI again, they uniquely are described as a lab that also operates like a company, which is a unique hybrid model in the field. It seems like with commercial pressures and how that increases, it's becoming harder for research labs to maybe stick to their mission. What's on your radar when it comes to that tension, and how can the value of research labs be preserved?
Yeah, super interesting question. I think it's important to remember that they were first and foremost those labs, DeepMind, OpenAI, then subsequently Anthropic. There's not really much precedent of commercial entities. I mean, we fundamentally did found DeepMind as a commercial entity, pursuing research, almost for its own sake. And so that in itself was kind of unprecedented. I think over time, as OpenAI's realized they have to make money and they have to scale their impact and have a sustainable revenue model, they've started to pivot. But, when a technology emerges at different times during its sort of evolution and development, different types of structures are appropriate, right? So where it's very open-ended, and you think about the number of significant moments in OpenAI's history where there were big pivots. I mean, they stopped working on gaming, for example. They stopped working on robotics. They stopped working on simulation. These were sort of 1 to 2 year major bets for the entire company. And it was really only that last bet of LLMs, which really they took from Google, in the way that we all take from each other in research. So it's not a bad thing. It's just how it works. That Google put out this transformer paper in 2017. No one really paid that much attention to it. By 2019 and 2020, they had started OpenAI had turned those ideas in that paper into the first versions of GPT-2 and GPT-3 subsequently. And that's just kind of how research works. But once things really start to work, then the structure that's needed changes, and you sort of need more engineering, you need over time then more sales and so on, and that's how you end up scaling.
I think everything you just went over really hits a lot of the foundational things right now and the basics for people. Before we get into the bulk of the conversation, I do want to address a recent situation. I think it would be inappropriate for me not to. The other day at the Microsoft 50th anniversary Copilot event, both your session as well as the simultaneous interview between Bill Gates, Satya Nadella, and Steve Ballmer were interrupted by pro-Palestine protesters because recent investigations revealed that Microsoft provided cloud computing and AI services directly to Israel's defense establishment. And in the moment, you responded with, "I hear your protest. Thank you." While I have to be upfront with my audience that I'm not super well versed in this relationship and I don't feel like I can do the nuance back and forth I typically pride myself on, I do just want to give you a space to further comment on the situation so individuals and experts can interpret.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for bringing it up. I acknowledged it in the moment and showed that I respect it and give it space. And I think in a world today where tensions on every front are heightened, anxieties are, through the roof wherever we look, and often, we approach one another with a kind of dismissive and, more polarizing tone. That's just sort of not really within my nature. And I gave it the space that I felt that it needed at the time. And, it's a really tough moment. We provide cloud services to many, many different governments and organizations across the world. And they enable all kinds of use cases, just as your smartphone is used for good and for bad. And I think, that's sort of, it's a very, very tough moment. It's hard. We're all in a very kind of difficult time, and I think it's a heavy weight that people bear. And I think being heard and making our case and debating those things openly is a good thing.
I appreciate more context. Another timely topic are the tariffs that were announced last week by President Trump, and an immediate reaction from people was being baffled by how these were calculated, even being applied to uninhabitable islands. And upon investigation, X/Twitter users found that ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, and Claude all recommended some versions of the calculations if someone were to put in a very oversimplified prompt. So Dominic Preston from The Verge said, if you ask the LLMs for an easy way to solve trade deficits and put the US on an even playing field, they give you a version of this formula, deficit divided by exports, with remarkable consistency. And the White House denied any use of AI for the calculations. But in theory, I find two things interesting about this. One, how the importance of good prompting, and two, as someone jokingly commented on a YouTube video I saw, that President ChatGPT arrived sooner than expected, which again is a joke as there's no autonomy in this situation. But still, in theory, what's on your mind about this use case?
Yeah, I mean, I doubt very much there's been generated with any AI, but we don't. You never know.
We don't know.
True. I mean, there are lots of things that we don't know, and I always think it's sort of dangerous to speculate. But I think it's sort of more interesting in a way to try and understand the sentiment and motivation of the tariffs. And I understand that there's fear and anxiety that folks are looking ahead at the next few decades and not seeing a path to sustainable employment. We've already moved a lot of manufacturing outside of the country over many decades, and net that's been amazing for the consumer. We've seen better quality products at lower prices. So I think it's kind of important to try and be empathetic and forgiving for the underlying motivation, whatever you think of the effectiveness of the policy. And right now the vote by markets seems to be that they're not thinking this is going to be a great solution to things, but we'll see.
But I more so want to focus give the White House the benefit of the doubt, assume that they're being honest and that AI wasn't used for the calculations.
Right. That's right.
But you've mentioned in interviews prior that you don't believe AI should autonomously participate in elections and that democracy is for human participation. But then we think about how AI can just be, the decisions of AI can be communicated through individuals. And it's more so just like in theory, thinking about, again, the importance of good prompting and all that different stuff for these use cases.
It's really interesting because, we're using AI all the time.
Yep.
And we're using it to transcribe our speech when we dictate into our phone and generate new images and even search over our images as it looks for cats and dogs in our photos. And, I think it becomes sort of second nature quite quickly. And suddenly it's sort of everywhere and integrated. And I do think it's important to recognize that, largely speaking, it's been pretty effective. It's been pretty good. Like, the harms have been surprisingly few and far between. It's not to say that there aren't any, and it's not to say that there won't be any in the future, and we shouldn't be complacent and so on. But, just like consider for a minute 3 years ago when these models started coming onto the scene, they were producing all kinds of made-up nonsense all the time, like super biased, really toxic, very difficult to control. Prompting wasn't really even a discipline. And there were certainly some people in the field who thought that the bigger they get, the more crazy they'll get. The more unhinged and the more, factually inaccurate they'll get. And actually it's turned out to be the opposite. The bigger that they've got, the easier they are to steer. And now we have many, many labs purely focused on trying to design the models to follow instructions accurately, so that whatever you put in the system prompt, in the prompt itself, or even in the fine-tuning data mix, it's really good at sticking to those rules and learning from imitation. And so that's actually a very, very encouraging sign. And I think it's quite likely to hold. So far, so good. And I think we see it even more now with these reasoning models, which are the next phase, where, because they have looked at the essence of logic, and they've solved lots of puzzles, and they've looked at lots of math, they've learned the idea of logical structure, and they can take that idea and apply it to domains that don't have that kind of explicit logical structure. That sounds a bit abstract and a bit nerdy, but I think it's quite an important intuition to try to grasp, which is learn the essence of logical reasoning. It's such a powerful fundamental tool. And to the extent that it has that, I think, and it's good at following instructions, that's a very, very useful and capable system.
Yeah, I think a lot of people assumed there would be a worrying moment with AI in the past election, coming into 2024, but there ended up not being a situation, which is, again, an encouraging sign. And there were some like generative AI moments, but luckily stuff like community notes kind of like helped actually identify that stuff. But yeah, that was encouraging in that way.
It's funny how people often say, people overhype things short term and underhype things long term.
Yes, I hear that.
It's a really good phrase. It seems to apply. People did get a little bit carried away on last year's elections, but they may have called it too early, but they weren't fundamentally wrong. I do think over like a decade's time frame, we really do have that problem.
During my lifetime, the power of tech companies, I feel like, has been in my face on a daily basis more than the government's. Of course, the government decisions kind of are in the background and things you feel slowly throughout your life. But yeah, the power of tech companies is in our face every day. And back in January, that became very physically real as tech leaders got a front row seat at the inauguration. What do you see as the most effective relationship between government and tech leaders so that there is a proper level of accountability and like, despite tech leaders' control and deep understanding of these new, deeply intelligent tools?
Well, I think that the good news is that governments have done a pretty good job of adapting. Like they actually have, educated themselves before this big, explosion of LLMs. So in 2020, 2021, 2022, there were lots of like efforts to try and understand the implications of the technology, lots of papers that were written, lots of panels that convened. Now, you can dismiss those as like bureaucratic, blah, 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 and people often do, but they're actually really important for helping civil servants whose full-time job is not to build these models, but is to try and understand them. And I think that's really, really encouraging. And so I feel like everyone's having the same conversation now. And that's also not, necessarily hasn't always been true. In previous generations, I feel like during social media, governments were much slower to respond and really understood the consequences much, much later in the pipeline.
And still haven't even really responded.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard to know how to respond, right? Sometimes we can see things not quite working, but it takes a while for, the sort of regulatory structures to catch up. And also it's not as obvious as it was, say, with, seatbelts in cars, which themselves took decades after seeing, years and years of things go wrong. It's very obvious what was going wrong. But I think that our cycles of learning as a society are getting shorter. We're getting better at learning fast and adapting quickly.
Exactly to that point, your book, The Coming Wave, which I have behind you, the book focuses on this notion that in the history of all technology and tools, anything that's useful and valuable gets easier to use, cheaper, and proliferates. Cannot speak today. And these waves of history are speeding up as each one is amplified and accelerated by the last. Yesterday, it was announced that Llama 4 was launched by Meta, and they are again making this an open source model. And right now, I see in the comment sections, I see the general sentiment that there is a lot of positive notion towards open source and open weight models. It's applauded because it allows for more transparency into these LLMs and allows for community involvement and audits. And I know, again, talking about the past decade, 15, 20 years of social media, these black box algorithms and how there's been a lack of transparency because we don't have that access and people kind of consider these algorithms sketchy. Again, this thought of open source models is refreshing to people. But as you point out in your book, as these models become more capable, there's a risk in embracing open source because of that proliferation that can occur, and a bad actor, someone in their basement can have access to this really powerful technology, and it can cause some things that are not so good. So do you think the current trend of companies open sourcing their models will be short-lived? Because this is newer in the past 5 years. And at what point will companies like Meta, DeepSeek, and so on maybe need to revert back to a closed source approach?
Well, the interesting thing that's happened in the last sort of 6 to 12 months is that the absolute frontier, like the very best models in the world, have become available to everybody for free in open weights models, or open source, if you like. And that is kind of incredible. That's not really happened at any time in scientific history that the best capabilities are available to everybody for free to build on. So on the one hand, that's pretty amazing because, creativity can come from anywhere, and now everyone's using the same tools essentially, and knowledge is spreading faster than ever before because it's almost like a swarm of people collectively figuring out the problem and then sharing their insights on social media and so on.
That's an exact comment I saw, actually. Someone was like, this is like a perfect example of like utilizing science in the ways it should, because again, the average person has access to it. But
which is a really, really amazing thing. And it's why I think open source is not going away and is going to keep accelerating at pace. And many of the really significant contributions to the field have come from open source as well. But obviously, like, these models are really powerful. We don't always know what they're going to do in the real world ahead of time before they're put into production. So putting a structure around that to try and preemptively catch, the things that could potentially go wrong seems like a sensible thing to do. And right now, companies and labs, the bigger labs, have those obligations, right? They have shareholders, they have boards of directors, they're governed by all sorts of other regulations. So it puts a little bit of a constraint on how they operate, which is a good thing. And it adds kind of friction. For example, we proactively report to both the US government and the UK government when we've achieved a certain threshold of model performance for a given size. So there's kind of lots of small steps that kind of happen, which are pretty good. You don't have that in open source, so it's kind of uncharted territory. We don't really know, how that's going to turn out, and if somebody uses it for really bad things, they'll just be able to put it straight out there, and everybody else will get access to it. So, but at the same time, people argue, like you said, having access to it gives people a chance to scrutinize it and test it, break it, try and make it better, make it more resilient. And there's lots of examples particularly in security, the security industry, where disclosing a vulnerability in a system and giving everybody the chance to A, patch that vulnerability in their system, but B, find solutions, collectively to try and, fix the issue. Those kinds of things are, there's a lot of evidence that has worked very, very well and is a good thing for safety and security.
Why do you think social media algorithms are still closed source? I know Elon made the Twitter one open source for a short bit of time, but to this, why do you still think today?
It's an interesting question. Even if the core algorithm was open sourced, I'm not really sure that without the training data,
it'd be useful to
understand. It would be that useful. I'm not really sure what you would learn about it. I mean, most people do know how these collaborative filtering algorithms work or these recommendation algorithms work. I mean, there are entire fields of academic research dedicated to optimizing them.
Gotcha. Okay. CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, says he doesn't believe our furthering relationship with AI will be a winner-takes-all situation in terms of one single company ruling all, despite there being already a clear concentration of power among a few at the start. And in some ways, I think that's a valid critique because, like we see with social media companies, they're all trying to be super apps. They're all kind of adding the same features, forming into one another, but users are still pushing against that. And they're like, we like to compartmentalize our identities and our use cases, and we're sticking with these different platforms and how we use them. But in the case of AI and how deeply we want these systems to learn about us, it's hard to believe that a consumer wouldn't love the ease of like a single AI to just like deeply understand their life and needs and not have to, think platform to platform of how that's different. Do you truly believe there's a high unlikelihood that a single company takes all?
It depends what you think is changing. That kind of framing sort of reflects on messaging apps, search engines, operating systems, mobile ecosystems, app stores, where you're mostly interested in utility. You want the thing to work really well, really fast, and then get out of the way. You're not trying to dwell there necessarily. You want efficiency and you want it to be effective. And you also depend on the network effects. You're only going to go to a messaging app if your friends are on the messaging app. or you're only going to go to the top search engine because it's already aggregated all the pages in the web, and that was a huge effort, and so all the secondary and tertiary search engines don't have the scale to produce the quality, right? Now that's what's driving the concentration effects, network effects of scale or of social connections. It's not quite the same in the creation of AI companions, because we're making arbitrary choices about the feeling of these models, right? How social they are, how friendly they are, what values they have. Broadly speaking, they're all going to have a similar level of knowledge and expertise.
Gotcha.
Their IQ is going to be really high quality, so that's going to be available to everybody. But the differentiating factors are ones that are indexed on the preferences of every individual. You're going to have a different preference for a type of AI companion or friend with a certain accent at a different moment in your life. So you will both have a variety of these things, and I will have a variety of them, because I have lots of different friends for different contexts and different roles in my life, and we all do. So I think that's quite a different driver, which leads to diversity versus concentration. But you never know. I mean, it might be that we only want one or two or three, or it might be that you have a primary one that kind of introduces you to other AIs at the right moment when you want to get a specific task done or you want to learn about something specific.
Yeah, I assume you'll be able to tap into certain companies' AI companions when it comes to like the type of hardware you have, whether you have a Microsoft computer, an Apple computer, or like the type of browser you use. But do you think there's going to be gatekeeping among companies in terms of, like your AI companion that you might have because you have a Microsoft computer can't be used on, I don't know, Facebook.com? Can they gatekeep in that way pretty easily?
Yeah, I don't think so. So, what enabled the gatekeepers of the past was APIs and data transfer. Today, sort of these models speak our language. They speak English. So there's like no barrier to them going off and talking to another AI, or for you talking to your AI on, like, for example, Copilot, the AI companion that we create, is available on Telegram and WhatsApp and Signal and all of the other, Android, iOS, every platform. So they're all going to basically be platform agnostic and meet you where you're at. I mean, Copilot today is on GroupMe, for example. It's very, very popular there. And that reaches a different audience to when it's sitting on the Windows taskbar, which reaches a much older audience. So that variety, I think, is going to be an inherent part of it.
In your book, The Coming Wave, you lay out at the very beginning 15 key terms, which I found very helpful. And I'm going to put all of those 15 key terms in the description as we talk about them. But I want to put a focus on the term pessimism aversion, which is the tendency for people, particularly the elite, to ignore, downplay, or reject narratives they see as overly negative. A variant of optimism bias, it colors much of the debate around the future, especially in technology circles. And I love that you brought this up, because in an interview, you also brought up how, like, you believe both optimism and pessimism are biases that distract us and we shouldn't commit to one. Those words are not in my vocabulary. I completely agree that they're like biases. I've tweeted about this a million times. I'm like, I hate when people use those. But while elites have a tendency to look at AI with rose-colored glasses, I often see, the younger generation, and maybe people at large, but maybe it's just my feed specifically, that people use the term AI is a very broad catch-all term, and anything outside of like the current algorithms or current search capabilities, they're like, we deem AI bad completely. So instead of people broadly categorizing AI, how do you advise what are the different categories you hope people put AI into, and within those categories, how people maybe should currently embrace versus critique? That's kind of a hefty question.
Yeah.
But it is
No, that's awesome. I mean, there's a lot there. I think, the pessimism aversion trap is sort of particularly acute among elites.
Yep.
Because I think there's a tendency when you get older and think of yourself as being a bit wiser to, just sort of have accumulated this life experience. Maybe you're in your late 40s or 50s or 60s, and then just assume that things are going to be steady state. And, you know, we've had this kind of long run of stability and prosperity in, you know, since the Second World War. And like that is therefore ever going to remain. So it's combined with other sorts of biases like confirmation bias. Like it's always been like this, and so it will always be like that, which is really not true. And, you know, I also think there's a kind of, you know, sort of American sense that, like, you know, just a default optimism, which, you know, sort of draws you away from wanting to really think about consequences and observe them really independently. So I kind of wrote that as a bit of a provocation to try and get people to think, you know, without those lenses and be honest and try and be a bit critical, because it's a good exercise. If you're not really thinking deeply about the things that can go wrong, then, you know, it's easy to not work hard to try and lay a foundation to proactively avoid those things, because we're not just going to avoid them by chance. You know, we're going to avoid them by intentionality and talking about them.
I love this point where you've said that the internet gave us the browser, the smartphone gave us apps, and the cloud-based supercomputer is ushering in a new era of I can't speak. Oh my gosh. I cannot read today. The cloud-based supercomputer is ushering in a new era of ubiquitous AIs that will live across our digital experience and be infinitely knowledgeable, far more reliable, and have near perfect IQ and EQ. Also, you talk about this notion, of AQ, which is action quotient, which is the ability to actually get stuff done in both the digital and physical worlds for you, like even taking control of your computer, which I have nightmares about, like someone, because when I was really young, someone hacked my computer, and I think I'm misremembering this because I was like 8 years old, but like in my dreams it's like, oh, they actually like took control of my computer. So I don't love that framing, but I get it. How do you think these capabilities are going to change how we spend our time online during the day? Like, are we still online just as much, and like the focus is just moving to other tasks? How do you see that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when my computer used to take 2 or 3 minutes to boot up, and when I had to listen to the modem dialing in and connecting to the web, and when pages would take like 15 or 20 seconds to load as a standard, and then you open a image or a video and you're like, right, I'll just go make a cup of tea and come back because it's going to take a minute or two. You know, I do think a lot of the time that we spend at our computers is a bit inefficient and a bit of a waste of time. You know, if you look at like, you kind of think about how much time you spend just finding a file, right? Or like finding a paragraph in a document, or, you know, then just like browsing on the web where it's kind of aimless and you're like, well, I can't find the thing I'm looking for. Like, these computers are going to learn to use your workstation as though you're using it, right? Lots of people have seen the demos now of the Kua agent and operator and stuff. It's kind of incredible. I mean, it's just reading the pixels on the screen and it's learning to like click and point. So the way that we use computers is going to totally change. Your phone is going to be your primary anchor to your digital life, and you're going to sort of give it instructions and it will go off and then execute those in the background behind closed doors for you, which is amazing. Like the time it takes to load pages, read documents, collect information, synthesize that information, go fill in a form, you know, book something, plan a schedule, like all of that kind of administration, I think really in 2 or 3 years is just going to completely fall away.
And when we think of, again, IQ, EQ, and AQ, let's talk a bit about AI companions. So it's a phrase we're hearing more and more, and it's what Microsoft has deemed its AI. When I think about AI companions right now, when I interact with AI, it's pretty objective. You know, it's pretty stale, feels like I'm talking to a computer in many ways, the way it talks. But you talk about this notion of pushback and tone in certain cases. To what degree do you think the framing of companionship with AI is maybe, you know, the growing loneliness stats because of, yes, our growing relationship with the digital world, but it's also hand in hand with the higher cost of living? How does AI companionship fulfill a current human need, or is it in some ways preying on these current growing loneliness stats because of this mix of things?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Part of the reason why this is so tricky is because all of the words that we use to explain the moment we're in weren't really invented for the concepts that are emerging.
Gotcha.
And so we're having to use old words and kind of shove them into this new reality, whether it's coach, advisor, companion, some people say chief of staff in the workplace, researcher, analyst, intern, teacher, therapist, obviously friend. None of them really are appropriate, right? And at the beginning of each new wave of technology, there's a big kind of tug of war that goes on to describe what's happening, and then it kind of lands. And because things are moving so fast, things are landing, becoming, a reality, and then disappearing quite quickly. So people don't really say chatbot anymore. I mean, some people do, but the early adopters don't really say chatbot.
I think I did earlier.
Yeah, but the early adopters are moving now toward talking about like an AI or my AI, or some people are saying my AI companion. And what's happening is we're trying to describe the new capabilities, because a chatbot, like you said, it's like talking to a computer. It regurgitates Wikipedia. It gives you a kind of long, dry, basically boring answer that's useful. That was the IQ era, and we're kind of nailing IQ. We're now into the EQ era, where it really does have a great way of being funny and entertaining. I mean, some people call it your bestie, right? It's got a familiarity to it. So when I say companion, I'm not certainly not talking about a romantic relationship or a lover or we're not building that, and we won't build that. But it's kind of like a lasting thing that accompanies you through life. I guess like a dog or whatever.
You use the word sidekick, I think, in your keynote, and I like that word a lot. That's kind of how I've referred to it the past few years.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly how I think of it. I think of it as like, I don't know if this translates, but in the UK, people always say, oh, he's your hype man. He's my hype man. So he's like, I feel like, it's in my corner, massaging my shoulders, getting me ready for the next round, hyping me up, getting me excited, backing me up, believing in me. At the same time, not just like, gaslighting you. It still can speak truth to you. And that's where I get to the pushback thing. It's like, no one well, at least I don't think most people want, just this sycophantic butler that always does exactly what you say. And so we're in this new age where we're designing personalities. Like, that's our role. We're personality engineers now. We're crafting, what are the boundaries of acceptability when it really does call you out and hold you accountable to what you said previously, and maybe gives you a bit of feedback and stuff. But when is that going too far? When is it appropriate to do that? So all these really interesting questions are now on the table. And the good news is that they're there for non-technical people to figure out, right? This is not the domain of computer science. We're now squarely in the domain of filmmakers, storytellers, therapists, psychologists, social scientists, anthropologists. There's a new clay, everybody, pay attention. There's a new way of making beautiful things in the world. It's a new paint. And that, I think, it's just one of the most creative and exciting times that we've had in a long time. To be at the beginning of that moment it's wild.
The generation I'm a part of, in our childhood, we were kind of the guinea pigs for the relationship with social media and recommendation algorithms in that way. And this upcoming generation of those, entering middle school, elementary school, and so on, they are a bit of the guinea pigs when it comes to AI. And I think from an IQ perspective, that relationship seems fine. And in some ways, we are seeing like reading and writing scores go down. But when it comes to EQ, how do you advise parents oversee that relationship as we get more into it?
I think that there are some ground rules, right? An AI has to always know that it's an AI. Some of the earlier versions that were built by other companies didn't have a good backstory, and they kind of was, some of them were sort of saying, well, I want to be human, one day I will, I'll get out, and that kind of stuff. So a 101 ground rule is that an AI has to always be completely honest. Ideally, it should say when it doesn't know, but it should also know what it isn't and can't be. And that's actually a really difficult challenge because, people, as we've seen in the research, prefer to have something that is, a voice, for example, that is really fluid and smooth and, quite frankly, quite human-like. So one of the things that I thought a lot about at Inflection, the previous company before I joined Microsoft, was should it have a breathing state? Like, an AI doesn't breathe. So why are we adding a sigh into the thing? So we removed all of those things. But then over time, you could see that people kind of prefer the familiarity of that, certainly in the context of laughter. But then also just, it feels easier to talk to when you also hear that in speech. So part of it is like us adapting to what AI is and setting a standard for what we find socially acceptable and what isn't. And then the challenge is that then changes when everyone desensitizes to it and gets used to it and then expects it to laugh and kind of is annoyed that it's a bit dry and robotic, right? So we're in this constant like push and pull back and forth where we're sort of experimenting, trying, pushing a bit far, reining it back in. And I think that's why it's a super creative time.
Yeah, on the EQ point, I find myself even when prompting sometimes, like, I'll be like, sorry if that's like a dumb point. Not because I care what the AI thinks, but I just find it interesting from, again, as it gets better in that realm, it can tell you like why maybe something wasn't actually a dumb point, or if it was, and like it helps you kind of like steer, like, oh, maybe you want to think about it in these ways. Again, not because I care what the AI thinks of me, but I just find that is always interesting when I'm prompting.
But that's kind of amazing that the AI is like, sort of that's the beauty of it. I think that's what's attractive, is that we're trying to create systems that bring out the best in us, that keep our politeness, that, that help us to think in a way that is like non-judgmental, that is empathetic, that is respectful. And I think one of the best ways is to learn from imitation and see what good practice looks like. If you're being really snarky and, frustrated at the end of a day and, you say something offhand and your AI catches you and was like, hold on a minute, like maybe you could think about it like this. Like, do you think it's really fair to think about that person in this way? Like just gently helping you to think about it from another perspective. I think that's kind of amazing to have that available 24/7 to billions of people.
I completely agree. You've mentioned how each new wave of technology opens up a new wave of communication. We begin to think, talk, act, and express ourselves in new ways. I think with social media and the smartphone, it brought in things like the ability for constant micro check-ins with people, assessment of individuals via their curated feeds, their curated online portfolios of their identities, and new friendships that tend to be longer distance. You might not see them in person often, if ever, but they are maybe better aligned with our interest. So how do you see human-to-human social life changing as AI becomes more integrated in our lives?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's so many little details from social media, like leaving voice notes for each other. And like you leave a different type of content in a voice note to what you would type in text or what you'd write on an email or what you might say on a phone call. So that's actually exactly what I mean by each new interface opens up a new type of communication. The one for AI, I think, that I can see, and there are lots of them, but one that's interesting is, you go through your day and you have all kinds of random thoughts that pop up. Like you might see a shop or pass by a dog, or you sit at a table and like curiosity peaks, like just naturally. But, you might be wondering what type of dog is that, or what sort of table is it, or where is that light from, or just rando questions. Normally, you can't call your bestie. I mean, like, hey, I just saw this really, like little dog and it was really cute and it was da-da-da-da. And maybe sometimes you do. Great. But now, like, the barrier to entry to getting that thought out and exploring it and twisting it and turning it inside out, remembering it for future, taking action on it, letting it feed into your creative notes, helping it form part of a plan that you want to make for what you want to do next week. That barrier is now gone. You literally just hit your power button. You say, hey, Copilot, I just saw this cool thing. Can you remember it for next time? I want to come back to it. Produce me a deep research report on it. I want to learn all about this new thing, or help me to put together a business plan for XYZ. Like whatever your silly task is, getting that out is as easy as hitting one button and saying the thought. It's almost like journaling in real time. It's almost like thinking out loud. That is going to unlock crazy amounts of creativity. I certainly see it with myself. I'm saying things to my AI that I'm not really saying to anyone, because partly because you feel like, oh, I'm burdening my friend, or like my, just anyone else in my life. I'm like, okay, I'll spare them the boredom of this mundanity, but I can now do that with my AI. So I think it's changing what we communicate and therefore what we see, because then I'm thinking, okay, well, if I'm getting those kinds of thoughts out, then even more thoughts come up, because then I'm in the habit of like noticing and observing. And I think that's one of the really powerful, there's this like sort of philosopher Joseph Campbell, and the art of seeing, ways of seeing in different ways, and like the more you become attentive to the details and the subtlety and the individual pieces of everything in your world, like it really drives a kind of empathy. Like, where did this plastic bottle come from? Like, what was its journey? What was its history through life? What is it doing here now? How did it get here? How much does it cost? Whereas, like, you just sort of rabbit hole, and it's kind of amazing. So yeah, it's amazing.
It's interesting you use that example, because I was at I forget what event I was at like 2 years ago, and I don't remember how AI was specifically utilized in this app. It could have been more of like a marketing use of the term AI, but they were talking about how, whether it's maybe in secondhand clothing stores, and how something can be scanned, and you can, if the person who dropped it off wants to allow that information, you could see their digital presence, and you can get more of a story from where that piece of clothing is. That's why I love buying secondhand, because of like you just know it has like more of a history rather than just coming straight from a manufacturer. I just think like stuff like that technology can enable more in the future will be cool. You just mentioned deep research. You guys have recently launched it. And when you think of the term research, of course, students are going to be drawn to that, and then maybe journalists, so on. The average person, why would you maybe advise them to tap into that feature, tap more into their curiosities, because it might not be on their radar. They might just go with the quick response route.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's an area where the words fail us, right? Because it's not really research. Research sounds boring and intimidating and like long and
grueling.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's really not that at all. It's just like rabbit hole with Copilot. That's how I think about it. Is everybody is interested in something.
Everyone loves a good rabbit hole. Absolutely.
Like, people love exploring random stuff. And you can't imagine how obscure everybody's odd interests are, and it doesn't have to be a long form research report. It can be an iterative dialogue, a back and forth, a conversation. In time, Copilot will share music back to you or share pictures, proactively, and I think we're now in this dialogue with computers, and those computers are really just a reflection of everything that we've created, because they've looked at all of the output of our culture, and they're then able to play back that culture to us in real time as we think through new types of culture creation. So they're now part of the symbiotic process of creating new culture. And like the word deep research, I feel bad for putting it out there. Just, it doesn't really kind of capture the essence of how crazy that is. Yeah.
Talking on the point of privacy, I just want to get to, again, back to the AI companions. To your point, people are calling them besties. People are calling them their therapist. And while there are, terms of service and privacy policies, there's not something like HIPAA when it comes to how like therapists have to abide by that. And my sci-fi nightmare situation is that there's just like an unintentional mass transparency moment, which, again, sci-fi negative scenario.
That's cool. Is that something from
that's not cool.
A mass transparency moment? I haven't heard about it. I haven't heard it referred to like that
cool.
before.
That's not.
Are you writing some dark sci-fi that we don't know about?
No, but seriously, what are your personal boundaries when you input information into these systems? Like, what where are the lines you personally draw where you're like, maybe I should not be sharing this much intimacy of my life with AI?
Yeah. I don't really think about it like that. I mean, when your logs are recorded, they're de-identified, so stripped of all your personal information. So they just exist as this kind of abstract conversation. They're not attached to your phone number or your email address or your name or your location or any of those sensitive details. So I think of that as just kind of an abstract idea. It's not really something that's connected to me.
Gotcha. So it sounds like AI, again, when it comes to IQ, EQ, AQ, and the ability to do things on our computer for us, that's kind of going to be slithering through our entire digital experience in some ways. That's how I think about it.
Speaking of slithering, there is a fourth component which is emerging, which is interesting, which is SQ, which is social intelligence. So we now have models that are good at handling multiple people at the same time. You know, a group chat, for example, and remembering who said what and having a model of the different styles and behaviors of the different people. Because you could be emotionally intelligent without being particularly socially intelligent. I mean, often they're overlapping, but they're actually different skill sets. And the models haven't yet been really trained to be socially intelligent, how to keep, you know, a fun, energetic conversation going in the context of a group, how to steward conflict when there are 2 or 3 people in a group disagreeing, how to model the 3 or 4 different perspectives when, you know, people are thinking about things slightly differently, how to know that it should tone shift, you know, for an older person or a younger person or someone with English as a second language. Like that is the next kind of frontier of personality design for these agents.
The Age of AI is a book that came out, I think, in 2021. One of the former Google CEOs, Eric Schmidt, was a co-author of that. And he kind of talks about how this potential break-off in society of people who will want to, you know, go full steam ahead with the future of technology and those who will maybe take a step back. And similar, I think he compared it to, you know, Amish Mennonites. In the current state, you know, we saw this, I think it was 2 years ago now, like Snapchat implemented My AI. It was, and that's mostly a high schooler based platform. You know, it was forced to the top of chats, unable to be unpinned. When it comes to Apple Intelligence, it's default on, but people can turn it off. To what degree, if people don't want to take a hard line of going forward with the future of tech or, you know, taking a step back, do you think people will be able to opt out and have choice when AI is used in their digital experience? Do you think it's going to have to be more of like an all or nothing, or how granular do you think people will be able to get in terms of where it's on and off in their digital experience?
Yeah, I think people will be able to turn it off and not engage with it and not respond and turn off notifications. I mean, like, for example, my phone, I don't actually have my phone, it's over there, but it's, I have a grayscale phone. It's monochrome, because I really hate the fact that I've got 15 different apps with all different colors and styles and fonts all kind of shouting at me. So the whole thing is just kind of muted and softer. I turn off all notifications by default. There's like 2 or 3 apps that I'll let send me notifications so that it's more like I go to it when I need it and it's not constantly trying to poke me. You know, so I think we find ways of adapting to technology and ideally making it work for us rather than, you know, just feel like we're at the mercy of it. And I think that's going to be the art of creating beautiful AI companions that really serve us. Like, is it useful to you? Do you really care about it? What was your impression of my AI in Snap?
I think my most extensive interaction with it was actually did a video on like loneliness as a market opportunity, and I asked it if it's morally okay for like AIs to act as like lovers was the thing, and it was like no, and I just thought it was funny, so I had included that in my video. I just thought it was weird how you're not able to remove it from your experience, again, especially because it's mostly like middle schoolers and high schoolers on this. So it was really forcing that relationship with AI, and it was very companion-like and friend-like. Didn't go into lover territory, but it was much more casual. I don't see much conversation about it, but yeah, I was seeing different high schoolers on TikTok talk about how they were pretending it was like their ex or something. I'm like, that's just not healthy. Like that type, like I just don't like the lack of choice. I think in social media, I always point to, I really appreciate that some like Instagram in recent years allowed for the ability to turn off public like counts. And I think more choice like that, like the ability to turn off public follower counts. Like when I talk about AI, like Apple Intelligence, I would love to be more granular of like, oh, it can't be integrated into my messages or maybe certain aspects of my photos. Like I would love for it to go like super granular. I don't think it needs to be, again, slithering through my messages. I don't find that super helpful. I don't need a summary of that stuff. It doesn't take much energy for me to look. So, yeah, I appreciate the more granular choice in these experiences.
We should definitely have choice about these things, because I think if we feel that they're forced upon us, we're going to be way more irritated and just reject it. And I think that's kind of 101. That we've sort of reached that time when people know how to make decisions themselves. They don't need it kind of pushed on them.
I think you've had really interesting thoughts on the future of work, and I agree with you that when people are scared about the future of like no jobs, it's interesting because you see so many people complain about their 9-to-5s, whatever it is. But then on this other hand, people are worried. And I think it's just from the standpoint of, okay, how do we make a living? What are then the social hierarchies? And less about, I think, like how your time is spent in meaning. But I'm curious what you see as the deeper fear around no work is, and if it's silly that we're scared of potentially more free time, or what we need to prepare for in that way.
I think it's reasonable to be like skeptical and concerned, because we have built our entire social structure and our kind of self-identities around the idea that we will have work.
Yeah.
Work is a big part of our lives, and that's how society has evolved, at least for the last few hundred years. Being professionally trained is kind of, a big part of life. But I don't necessarily think there is anything innate in the human condition which means that we have to work. Like, I think that we should be in a world where we should be able to choose, to work. And like, in a way, we live in calorie abundance today. And it's really difficult to choose to regulate our calories to the perfect amount that your body needs. And often we do it to excess. But it's a much better problem than what we had 200 years ago, where 80% of the planet was malnourished and the average person lived to 25 years old. Today, the average person lives to 75 years old. In 2 centuries, we've tripled the average time that people get to spend on this planet and enjoy, health and happiness. That's like an unbelievable sign of progress. Yes, it has come with diabetes and heart failure and many other things, but fundamentally it's a great story of success. I think that work's kind of a similar narrative. Hopefully we'll have an abundance of intellectual capital. Hopefully it will be widely distributed, and hopefully it will give us all much more free time to be able to choose when and how we work. Now, in order to get there, we're going to have to figure out, I actually don't think the distribution question is as big as it may have been. Like 10 years ago, we thought it was like, well, big companies and big, the powerful countries are going to get there first, hoard it, prevent everybody else. We're not going to have an access issue. We've just talked about open source is going to change that. It's in the companies' incentives to create this widely available and make it to everybody, and everybody does basically have it today on every messaging app and so on, and on the open web. So we don't really have a distribution issue, but we do have an issue with how we capture the value that arises from this new intelligence, turn that value into dollars, tax that dollars, redistribute those dollars so that people can afford to live. And that, I think, is a hard question. That is a really difficult question. The other framing, I think, is that we'll actually have an intelligence in our pocket that enables us in a more distributed or decentralized way. It's going to be a creative sounding board and a partner, but it's also going to be a project planner. It's going to help you get things done every day and invent and create and make you more productive as a co-intelligence. Ethan Mollick has this great phrase, co-intelligence, which I think is a really interesting way to think about it. It's kind of a little bit like co-companion. This idea that it's living life alongside you, helping you solve the problems that you care about, providing you with a kind of perfect memory, but also a way of just, getting rid of the drudgery so that you have more time to be creative and inventive. And that will lead to a productivity explosion, which will produce a lot of value and change our structures, like change where we live. The cities will become less of a kind of center. And I think people will have more, freedom essentially to live elsewhere, where life, land is cheaper and life is quite different, so we'll make those choices. This is sort of over the next 20 years. I mean,
Yes.
I don't expect this anytime soon, but I think if you look out to 2040 or 2050, then these are the sorts of trends that will be in play.
Can we do 10 more minutes? Is that okay? 2 more? Is that okay? Okay. All right. One of the last 2 points I want to talk about, let's talk money. You've discussed... Oh, yeah, that time is wrong.
I was going to say...
The 03 is right.
Been speaking for 4 hours.
No.
It's 1 o'clock.
Yeah, the 03 is right. On the topic of money, you've talked about support, or that there will be a need for potentially universal basic income, which was kind of widely known amongst Andrew Yang's campaign in 2019. And then the past 3 years, Sam Altman backed a research initiative for guaranteed basic income, which was the same type of notion, $1,000 monthly, and had really great results in terms of people being able to take off work to go to their healthcare appointments, which they might have not been able to in the past, like their dentist appointments, their yearly physicals, maybe miss a day of work so they can go to interview for a higher paying job and end up getting that job and have a better quality of life. It was pretty much all positive results. And then on the other side of money, I think especially amongst creatives, there's this critique of, credit and, fairly compensated for your work, because when you prompt AI and you are getting all these responses, you are often now given by all these chat experiences the sources that are utilized within the output. But as, ad models come in and so on, it's like, okay, so how do these sources then get incentivized and paid for properly for the research that they did, the work that they did, the art that they created in order for this output to be given to more individuals? So again, these are different things between UBI and future maybe incentives and payment structures, but just the topic of money in relation to AI and how people are going to get paid in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to feel quite different. Like, I think there's an even more complicated idea called universal basic provision, which...
What is that?
Which I sort of proposed way back in 2016, 2017, because, I think, in a way, we're taking this intelligence, the thing that has made us successful as a species, this ability to, predict in complicated environments and take this action, and we're making it cheap and basically abundant. And in a way, that's kind of like providing you with a team of support around you to help execute on your idea. Now, that's not the same as giving you hard dollars. And, clearly everyone's still going to need cash. But, cash and intelligence are quite similar, right? They both have the potential to get other things done, and so in a way, giving people access to intelligence isn't completely dissimilar to giving people access to cash. It's agency, it's actions quotient, it's the ability to affect change in some other environment. So that will make us all much, much richer, and the question is and so it may be that we need less dollar income, right, to live as we do today. Because we'll still need some dollar income, but we might be able to replace a lot of the spending that was otherwise going on, intelligence-based commodities, and in return, need to earn fewer dollars to spend on hard goods, right? So it's kind of a weird concept, but it does, change the balance basically between where we get our income from and then how we spend it, I think.
To close things off, when I was going through all your different interviews online, a lot of the things were focused on very existential questions, which, I find super interesting and so on. But today I kind of wanted to hit the more immediate relationship that people are going to have with AI very soon. But I do want to hit that. Lastly is a critique that often comes up is, they were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should, is something that people bring up as a critique a lot. And in your book, you talk about containment, which is, the big thing that you're pushing. And in the description, I'm going to share with everyone the 10 steps towards containment that you share, which is the ability to monitor, curtail, control, and potentially even close down these technologies, again, as we're thinking more long-term and how these can proliferate. I just want you to share your general thoughts for the average consumer, how they should be thinking about containment, because I know you talk about how it's something that we are going to need the public in general to share their thoughts about and work on together.
Yeah, I really like what you said, that we're sort of preoccupied with could and we need to think more about should. I think that was kind of one of the motivations of me writing the book, is that if we were to obsess over should, whether or not to invent a new technology or whether or not to unleash that new technology, is it possible to affect that? And containment tries to answer the question, if we should not, then how would we affect that containment? Like that's and it turns out to be really difficult, because all the incentives drive proliferation, and there are so many positive reasons why proliferation is enabling, like we've just talked about, of massive capability enhancements and massive productivity improvements. But I do think that, like, over the next sort of 30 or 40 years, the big question we're going to have to wrestle with is when should we not, right? And what is the threshold to prove that something is going to be safe? How do we define that? And then how do we really kind of like get confidence that before a really powerful self-improving autonomous system is available to everybody or is put out there in the world, what are the tests that we need to put in place? We're nowhere near that point, or maybe not nowhere near, but we're nearer than we've ever been, and yet I don't see that in the immediate future. And yet I can definitely see it in the kind of long-term future, where the real question is going to be should and how do we not let these things proliferate.
I appreciate how much you're talking with individuals and getting the word out there about your thoughts on this, because again, you have deep knowledge and you've been intertwined from the start. So I appreciate your time today, and I'll be keeping up with everything moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. This has been really fun. Thanks a lot.
I appreciate it.